first reading, Paul writing to the Ephesians says, "To him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, to him be glory." To him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, to him be glory. So I wonder, when you look in the mirror each morning, what do you see looking back at you? Do you see somebody brimming with confidence, ready for any challenge that the world is going to throw at you today? Or are you a bit shy, a bit reserved, a bit under the weather, generally hoping that today isn't going to be too difficult? One of the gifts of the Spirit is humility. So we Christians tend not to be too self-confident and maybe a little reserved. And so maybe we lack that confidence in our own ability. And after all, Jesus did on one occasion say, don't worry about tomorrow. Today has enough worries of its own. Don't worry about tomorrow, because today has enough worries of its own. So each day, are you confident that you're gifted and talented enough to deal with whatever befalls? Or do you think that your talents are extremely limited, your abilities and gifts are very few, and you can't achieve too much, and rather hope that too much isn't expected? It's very easy to see the limits of one's own ability, to see all the things you can't do, and to give up before you start. But never forget the power of God. Paul exhorts the people of Ephesus not to be limited by their own weaknesses. And on the face of that, that seems a very odd thing to say. How can you not be limited by your own weaknesses? But he goes on to explain how. He goes on to tell them to put their trust in their all-powerful God. So tomorrow, when you look in the mirror, remind yourselves of these words. And imagine God looking back to you and giving you the power. Paul reminds the Ephesians and you and me of the immensity of God's love. And he tells them not to be discouraged. This is what he says. I pray that out of his glorious riches, he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power, together with all the saints, to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ. Paul speaks from experience. God will strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being. How good is that? And then he prays that being rooted and established in God's love, you may have the power to grasp how wide and long and high and deep God's love really is. God's love is immense. And if we are rooted and established in that love, we will have the power to grasp the immensity of it, to not only grasp it, but to rely on it. So there we are, rooted in God's love, strengthened with the power of his Spirit. What more could anyone ask for? With God, all things are possible. And we see how true that is in our gospel reading. But we also see what happens when you rely on yourself and don't put your trust in the immense power of God. It's a familiar account. Jesus and his disciples cross the lake and go up the mountainside, probably to get some peace and quiet. because they've been with the crowds. But a great crowd follows them, eager to hear Jesus speak, but more eager to see some great miracle performed. Because Jesus' reputation had gone before him. And we're told that a crowd of people followed him because they saw the miraculous signs he had performed on the sick. You see, for the crowd, it was a great day out. There wouldn't have been too much entertainment for ordinary people in Israel at that time. And Jesus' teaching with the possibility of a miraculous healing would have had its attractions. So the crowd came to hear what he had to say, but in truth, they came more hopefully to see what he would do. And it was a long day, but no one had gone home. It was now getting near the end of the day, and no one had eaten. Furthermore, they were several miles away from the nearest town. And so Jesus poses a question. He asks Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? Philip was a local, so it was natural to ask him that question. His home was Bethsaida, the nearest town to where they were. It was about 8 miles away on the same side of the lake. So Philip would know the area. But Philip was human and immediately saw the problem. We're told there were 5,000 men. The women and children were ignored, you see, at those times. Buying food for 5,000 people would cost a fortune, wouldn't it? And so Philip replies, 8 months' wages wouldn't buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. He didn't have even a fraction of the money needed to buy bread for so many people. Why did Jesus even bother to ask him that question? Then Andrew turns up and brings with him a small boy. Clearly, the lad had offered to share his meager meal, and so Andrew brings him to Jesus. "Here is a boy with 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish," he says. I don't think he said that because he believed it was any help, but rather because the lad had offered it for Jesus and probably insisted on giving it to him. "Here is a boy with 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish," he says. But then he goes on to say, "But how far will they go among so many?" How far indeed. You can see the problem, can't you? And Andrew sees it too. It's the sheer quantity of food needed to feed so many people. For Andrew, the issue is not one of money, but the vast amount of food needed. It would be impossible to find that much food in such a remote area in such a short time. And this boy's supper was a drop in the ocean. It was a waste of time and effort, even bringing it to Jesus. So the disciples both failed. They were both limited by their imaginations. And really, that's the trouble with us grown-ups. We're too sensible. We have too much experience. We know what's what. We see the problem in human terms, failing to grasp the power and the love of God. It takes a child to have imagination. That's why Jesus told the disciples on another occasion, "Unless you become as a little child, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven." We have to be childlike with our imagination. Children believe in miracles. For a child, nothing is impossible. Fortunately, on that day, there was a child in the crowd. One person who saw things differently. One small boy. He didn't see the problems. He didn't see the difficulties. He had some food, not much, 5 barley loaves, 2 small fish. He could have eaten it himself, There was probably just enough for him, but instead he offers it to Jesus. He didn't let the size of the problem put him off, nor did he worry that he only had a little to give. He was happy to give it to Jesus and to leave Jesus to sort it out. And Jesus did sort it out big time. Everyone was fed. 12 baskets of food were left over. There was enough. There was more than enough. That's what happens when we put our trust in God and leave his love and his power to get to work. We may have very little to give, but if we give it all to him and give it generously, then he can work miracles. Don't put yourself down. Don't use the excuse that you have no great gifts in order to justify doing nothing. Philip didn't have enough money to buy bread. Andrew didn't think there was enough of bread around anyway, so they both did nothing. Philip didn't offer what money he had, and Andrew didn't ask Jesus what he wanted him to do. Only the boy was willing to give his all to Jesus and to trust Jesus to do whatever. The boy had very little, 5 loaves, 2 fish, but he placed them in Jesus' hands, and everyone was fed. We need to be as trusting in God as that small boy. And then we need to be as generous with what we have as he was. If we trust God totally and give our all to him generously, he will work miracles through us. The people had come to Jesus hoping to see a miracle. They were not disappointed. They were not disappointed because this one boy trusted Jesus enough and was generous enough to give him all he had, small though it was. We must follow his example, for if we do, God alone knows what miracles will occur. As Paul says, to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, to him be glory. Amen.